So this is something that has always interested me, and you're the history professor, so maybe you can help and kind of reconcile this. At what point in the chronology of our HBCU history does the debate between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington become most prevalent, if at all? Because, the snapshot always says, well, Du Bois was arguing for a certain type of education, Booker T was arguing for another. But just how significant was that, and what impact did it have on the development and the growth of our HBCUs?
So in terms of chronology, we're talking late 19th and early 20th century. I'll be honest with you, Mark. I often think that argument is overplayed. Right? We gravitate towards and celebrate what a number of past historians often refer to as great man history. Right? We want to focus on the great men of society who have shaped our society. And again, this is by no means trying to diminish the legacy of Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, who were titans in the field of the narrative of African American history. But what both of these men were doing essentially were carving out space, right? Space that they thought would be most beneficial to advancing the freedom dreams of Black folks. Again, for Booker T. Washington, he's tasked to go into Tuskegee. And I don't know if too many of your listeners have ever been to Tuskegee, but if you've ever been to Tuskegee, Alabama, it is in the middle of nowhere, right? So, get in a time machine with me and go back to the late 19th century and envision someone like Booker T. Washington, who's a graduate of Hampton Institute, being tasked to go down into the hinterlands of Alabama and to carve out a space where young Black folks could be educated. He understood and knew that we can't make an overt message attacking white supremacy because Black life was inconsequential to white folks in the state of Alabama. Black folks were being lynched and terrorized and brutalized. And so again, he very conveniently, and some would argue even pragmatically, began to say, look, what I'm going to try to do is cultivate a relationship, a friendship with white folks in order to secure the dollars that will carve and create this space. And in doing so, provide room for young Black folks to be educated. Now, again, he's criticized, and I would say rightfully so, in being extremely gracious toward his white benefactors. Of course, I live in Atlanta, and it's in Piedmont Park, a very popular park in Atlanta, where Booker T. Washington gives his very famous speech, his exposition speech, where he literally stands before a crowd of white folks and say, look, we can be as one as a hand, but as separate as the fingers. And again, a lot of people say, hey, you are embracing and celebrating segregation. Not Booker T. Washington, but Du Bois would be one of his largest critics. But I think also what he's doing is that, again, he's carving out space, right? And I talk about this in the chapter on Tougaloo. Booker T. Washington also was a large proponent of creating all Black towns, right? Mound Bayou in Mississippi is supported through people like Booker T. Washington, who says, yes, this is exactly what we need. Carve out our space. And I guess a way that we could look at that in 2021 is that Booker T. Washington is literally saying, look, we need to get away from some of these white folks. They're crazy, right? They're engaging in terrorism against our people, right? Racial violence is exploding, right? Don't mess with these white folks. Let's carve out our own space. And again, the legacy of that is that people like Marcus Garvey would adhere to those messages. People like the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad would adhere to those messages. They embrace many of the teachings of what Booker T. Washington was arguing. And so in my book, again, I talk about the second curriculum. This falls under the concepts of cultural nationalism, right? The Black folks understood the importance of building space and supporting Black institutions, supporting Black organizations, supporting Black businesses. These are all the type of things that people like Booker T. Washington argued for. Now, again, conversely, Du Bois is saying, hey, let's carve out space, but we need as he would, very popularly argue, we need a talented 10th, right? And a lot of folks look at that as elitism, right? But he's saying that, hey, everybody can't be, carpenters and brick masons and domestics and all these other professions that are being promoted at a place like Tuskegee. We need some folks who, again, can articulate and fight for Black rights in the halls of political power within America. We need lawyers and activists and writers and thinkers, right? Philosophers, young philosophers emerging from these institutions. So yes, Washington and Du Bois are kind of going back and forth here. But it's really about space. There's a survey that I came across from a parent in Mississippi. I can't remember the institute that actually commissioned this survey, but they did a survey of Black parents asking them what type of education they would prefer, right? Do you want vocational training, right, the Booker T. Washington method, or do you want the talented 10th, right? The idea of a more Victorian liberal arts training promoted by people like Du Bois. And one of the parents responded and said, look, you know what? I don't care what kind of education my son and daughter gets. I just don't want them to be a sharecropper like me, right? So I want them to have opportunity to carve out a different path for themselves. And I think that's the most important legacy of those two men, carving out space so the Black folks can make some decisions that freed them from the peonage and from the bondage that they experienced in the Deep South.
Very, very important. Folks, this book is great, and I encourage you to read it. And thank you for that. If you don't mind, I want to borrow that as we talk about that going forward. What would you call it, the great man view?
The great man theory.
Great man theory, yeah. Because you're right, we do that too much. We do. So,
I mean, Mark, we love messianic figures.
Yeah.
We love the idea of Dr. King riding in on a white horse and saving folks. But what we miss are the grassroots activists, the yeomen, the laborers who really push this movement forward. And again, that doesn't diminish someone like a Booker T. Washington or Du Bois or someone like a Dr. King or even, someone like a Rosa Parks. But again, we love these messianic figures, but we miss the larger picture of the fact that Black folks were struggling and striving and fighting to gain their freedom. And there are a number of no-name folks, right, who we've never heard of, who played critical roles in shaping the future of Black America. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to try to do with the book, is to bring some of these folks you've never heard of. Again, educators, teachers, faculty members at HBCUs who were just as important to advancing the freedom dreams of Black folks as some of these great legendary figures that we often venerate and celebrate.
And I appreciate that. Not only that, though, but sometimes we make messianic even the institutions themselves. Like we started out talking about Howard. One of the things I appreciate about your book, I mean, Howard's known as the Mecca, so to speak. You lift up Cheney and Tougaloo and Bennett, Alabama State, Jackson State, Southern, and your alma mater, A&T, because there's a lot of history there, transformative history that people don't know. People know about the great Howard University protests, but there was these kind of things that were going on in other cities and states and other HBCUs as well. So before we go, give us your thoughts about the significance of having an HBCU alum a heartbeat away from the presidency, and what that says about the cumulative journey of our HBCU institutions and what they've imparted to us and what has been produced from them.
Well, I mean, I think you said it. It's a cumulative journey, right? And I think that Vice President Kamala Harris would echo the same sentiment, is that you see her success, but what you don't see is the legacy of folks who made that possible, right? And these institutions are a part of that journey, and not just in creating a Kamala Harris, but as I argue, Mark, and I've said this in a couple of other interviews and talks that I've given now on HBCUs, the most important contribution. We celebrate the cultural pageantry of Black colleges. We love to talk about the Black college bands and the step shows and the energy, right? This is an era where we love to talk about Black boy joy and Black excellence. And yes, these institutions have become spaces where all of that can run free. And that's critically important, right? But the most important contributions that these institutions have made in their long histories have been reshaping and shaping the social and political contours of America. There would be no civil rights movement, either the early or the modern civil rights movement, had it not been for Black colleges. And again, this is not diminishing the legacy of the Black church and other institutions and organizations who have played critical roles in producing leaders, but HBCUs are one of the cornerstones of the Black freedom movement in America. And we don't get a Kamala Harris if we don't have a Diane Nash, right? We don't get a Kamala Harris if we don't have an Ella Baker. We don't get a Kamala Harris if we don't have a Jesse Jackson, right? You know, who runs his campaign in the 1980s, who's a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University. We don't get a Kamala Harris if we don't have a John Lewis. I love that story that Barack Obama tells about writing in the program when he was inaugurated, writing in John Lewis's program, inauguration program, thank you, right? You know, I'm paraphrasing here, but again, there would be no me without you. Right. And so, again, when you look at the legacy of institutions like Fisk, institutions like North Carolina A&T, institutions like Howard University and Florida A&M, and as you said before, some of the lesser known institutions, Alabama State, Alcorn, you know, these are institutions which paved that path for us to have a Kamala Harris. And it never was simply about producing Black leaders and Black excellence who would go on and succumb to the trappings of hyper-capitalism and embrace, you know, materialism and elitism. But it was always about young Black leaders understanding that they have a connection and a responsibility to the masses of Black people. Right? Ella Baker talks about this, and Barbara Ransby's great biography on Ella Baker really kind of lays out the type of education that a woman like Ella Baker received at Shaw University. And she talks about the fact that, hey, when I was at Shaw, it was always about service. It was always about maintaining this connection to the masses. Howard Thurman talks about that in his experiences as a young student. When we're talking about the great theologian and philosopher Howard Thurman, who talks about when he was a student in Morehouse, those same type of messages were embedded within him. So it was always about this connection with the masses and moving Black folks collectively, not just the Black elite, not just the lettered, not just those Black folks who were alumni of these institutions, not just moving them forward, but moving the Black masses. And so my hope for Vice President Kamala Harris moving forward, and I have full faith and trust that she will continue that legacy and understand that she is not an island unto herself, that she's a product of an institution like Howard University. She's a product of organizations like Alpha Kappa Alpha that have always been, as I said before, deeply connected with the freedom dreams of Black folks, and we're proud of her. And again, she represents the best of what HBCUs can and should be doing. And I hope that moving forward, we'll see more Kamala Harris's, we'll see more Stacey Abrams, we'll see more Raphael Warnocks. Again, all products of HBCUs, all now standing on the cusp of what we can only hope is a new day politically within this country.